What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through my updated running back rankings for week 5 of the NFL season. So we went from my top 30 earlier in the week. Now we are going to be going through my top 40. If you guys enjoyed the video, hit that like button, subscribe. But let's not waste any time. Let's just jump right into it here. Starting off in tier 1, I don't think my tier 1 has changed since I did the video on Tuesday. I have Jordan Mason going up against the Cardinals, Alvin Kamara going up against the Chiefs, and then Kyren Williams going up against the Packers. Jordan Mason has just been super productive without Christian McCaffrey. Also like the matchup here, should be a favorable game script. 49ers have the highest implied point total this week. Then I have Alvin Kamara. The dude's just been a monster. He's game script proof. Even if they're trailing this one, he's still going to get force fed as a pass catcher. And then the last guy, Kyren Williams, he is just handling a dominant workload. Even with the injuries, you'd assume this Rams team isn't going to score as much. There's not going to be as much touchdown upside. Kyren Williams is leading all running backs in red zone touches. So when they're getting inside the 20, he is just dominating the usage. He's averaging over 23 opportunities per game. So even if this offense struggles a little bit, he is still going to be very productive for fantasy. Now looking at tier 2, starting it off with Derrick Henry coming off of just a monster week 4. I think he's obviously going to be playable every single week. I do think this specific matchup maybe isn't the best just because the game script could be somewhat competitive. He's always going to be better in the games where they go ahead early, just absolutely dominate. They could do that here against the Bengals, but the line is somewhat close. I believe they're 2.5 point favorites here, but obviously still someone you're firing up as a very strong running back one. Then I have Breece Hall going up against the Vikings. Kind of a tough start to the season, especially efficiency-wise, coming off his worst game in week 4. I am expecting a bounce back. I just think he's too talented to continue to perform at this level. I know there's some concern, Braylon Allen kind of cutting into the usage. Could Braylon Allen working on the goal line? I don't think that's impossible, but I still think Breece Hall is a very, very strong play. And then the final guy in this tier is going to be Kenneth Walker. And coming into week 4, you had Zach Charbonnet just dominating the usage with Walker out. Week 2, week 3, Charbonnet was really productive in week 3. I wasn't quite sure what the usage was going to look like. Were they going to ease him back into the offense? They really didn't. 59% snap share, which is fine. 52% route participation, I think was really fun. Because if you look at Walker, Charbonnet, look at their college production, you would assume that Zach Charbonnet would be more of that pass catching back. Didn't know if Kenneth Walker had that receiving upside heading into the season. He gets 12 carries, 5 targets. Obviously, the 5 targets is a little bit, kind of skewed here because it was a super high volume passing game, trailing game script, but good to see him involved as a pass catcher. Obviously, he dominated on the ground, got into the end zone 3 times. I feel like you have to feel very good about Kenneth Walker moving forward, especially in this matchup here against the Giants, where it should be a favorable game script for him to just kind of run it out towards the end of the game. Now, pivoting into tier 3, I'm going to start off here with Josh Jacobs. And I know Josh Jacobs has been very, very frustrating to start off the season. And I get it, right? Running back 7 might seem high because the production just hasn't been there. He's the running back 31 in points per game. But when we look at the opportunities, he's averaging 19.1 opportunities per game. The dude has just not been able to get into the end zone. I think some positive regression is coming. And this is coming from someone who wasn't super in on Josh Jacobs heading into the year. Like, he wasn't my favorite player to draft. I think I maybe have him on like one of my rosters, but I do think he's going to have a turnaround here. He's still been pretty productive with his opportunities. It's not like he's getting this workload and has been terrible. He's been solid, so I think the touchdowns will come. Jordan Love being back is huge, just going to raise the ceiling of this offense, but I wouldn't completely panic here on Josh Jacobs. After Jacobs, I have Aaron Jones. Just a really, really fun start to the season here. I think especially with the bye weeks, he definitely belongs as an RB1. Then I have Bijan Robinson, and he's kind of in this interesting spot here because I really liked Bijan heading into the season. Through 3 weeks, it seemed like people were kind of like just disregarding him, but the usage was completely there. Then he goes out week 4. The usage is not there. I believe he came in with a shoulder injury, left with a hamstring, but when you had Raheem Morris talking after the game, about Tyler Algier's usage, he didn't really make it seem like Algier was playing more because of Bijan's injury. He kind of was just like, we rode the hot hand. He had some nice runs. We stuck with him. So short week, had the hamstring injury. Looks like he's good to go off the injury report. Pretty solid matchup here against the Buccaneers. I'm still a believer in Bijan Robinson, but I did have to dock him a little bit just based on the usage last week. Then after Bijan, I have James Cook going up against the Texans. Tough week 4, just a bad overall game from this Bills offense, but on a top tier offense, still their running back 1, should be a locked in RB1 play. Then after Cook, I'm going to be going with Chuba Hubbard, who has just been an absolute monster over the past couple of weeks. Jonathan Brooks is going to be out for this game, which I think is huge. I was assuming that Jonathan Brooks would have his practice window opened. It seemed like they were kind of being cautious with his recovery. They put him on the PUP list to start. I thought he'd be ready to go week 5. He is not ready to go, and he's not even ready to have his practice window opened, which I do think is pretty concerning for him long-term here. So Chuba Hubbard, at least within the next few weeks, should be a great option. 27.9 and 22.1 PPR points. In the last couple of weeks, he has totaled 26 and 22 opportunities in those matchups. I do think it's a tougher matchup here against the Bears, but he's playing well, and the usage is 100% there. We're going to have a few more Tier 3 running backs. I have Joe Mixon here going up against the Bills. There's no guarantee he plays this week. He has not practiced yet. He missed practice Wednesday. But from what I've seen, if he can log a Thursday practice, a Friday practice, I'd be fine playing him because this is a great matchup here. The Bills have allowed the most points per game to the running back position. So even if he's limited, I still think he'd be a really strong option. Obviously, if we're getting he's super limited, then I probably wouldn't have him this high. But if we're just expecting the slight decrease in usage coming off an ankle injury, then this is where I would have him slotted in here. Then I have James Conner going up against the 49ers. His usage has been pretty solid. Receiving work, a little bit underwhelming, not the best matchup, but I still think he's playable here as a high-end RB2. And then I have Brian Robinson Jr. This Commanders offense has been rolling. It'll be interesting to see how they look against a much better defense. Do they kind of fall back down to earth? Do they just continue rolling? But either way, I still think Brian Robinson Jr. is a really strong play. Now, before I shift into Tier 4, there's definitely some potential injuries impacting that tier. So I just wanted to run through the players that I'm assuming are not going to go. So Jonathan Taylor, I'm going to be assuming he's out with that ankle injury. I just don't see why you push him with a high ankle sprain, to miss no time. He's had some ankle issues in the past. I don't think they want to risk it. Nick Chubb had his practice window opened, but it definitely does not seem like he's going to be playing this week. So I'm assuming he's out. And then Jaylen Warren, Cordero Patterson, they're kind of up in the air at this point. For this video, I'm going to be assuming that they are not playing, which is why I have Najee Harris leading Tier 4 here. The usage is just going to be very, very strong if those guys are out. He hasn't been super great, but he's going to have pass catching upside with Jaylen Warren out. He's going to have that volume on the ground with Cordero Patterson out. And the Cowboys, I know they were good last week against the run, but the previous couple of games, it had not been great. So not super scared of the matchup either. Then after Najee, another guy impacted by an injury, we have Trey Sermon. If you need a running back in your starting lineup and you scooped up Trey Sermon, this would be the opportunity to play him if JT is out, obviously with that high ankle sprain. I think the Colts are going to be able to put up points in this matchup. Jaguars defense is not scary. Trey Sermon has looked like the clear running back too, so I don't think this is a spot where JT goes down and it just turns into a super gross split. Is Sermon going to come in and take 100% of Jonathan Taylor's opportunities? Probably not, but I still think he's very playable here as a running back too. And then the last couple guys in this tier, kind of sad that they have to be ranked this low. We have Travis Etienne in that same matchup. He's only averaging 11.6 points per game. You have Tank Bigsby kind of eating into the workload. It has just not been a great start here. And I don't think he's going to lose the starting job, but it definitely seems like he's at risk of this turning into a full-on committee. And then the last guy here, Devon Achane. And this has just been depressing because week 1, week 2, he was balling out, 2 in the lineup. They were just force-feeding him. The receiving usage was there. And then the last 2 weeks, all these Dolphins weapons have just, face planted. None of them can get anything done. It's tough to watch. He's put up 8.8 and 5.9 PPR points without Tua. I do think this is a fine matchup here. I think at some point they have to do something. Maybe that's bad analysis, but I just don't get how you have an offense with so many talented pieces and they just do literally 0 for 10 straight quarters at this point. Can't remember when Tua exactly got hurt in that game, but I'm still playing Achane, but obviously you're nowhere near as excited as you would have been after the first couple of weeks. Now pivoting into Tier 5, going to start off this tier with DeAndre Swift going up against the Panthers. This is an interesting spot here with Swift because through 3 weeks, He was the worst running back in the NFL, looked like he was at risk of losing his job to Roshan Johnson. Then all of a sudden he goes out week 4, has a great performance, and now he gets a pretty favorable matchup here. The Panthers have allowed the second most points per game to the running back position. So the question is, do we see the week 4 DeAndre Swift who can go out and capitalize on this bad matchup, or does he completely fall back to the guy we saw weeks 1 through 3? It's up in the air. I think mid-tier RB2 is a fair place to have him. After Swift, I'm going to be going with Jerome Ford. Obviously, he gets a bump with Nick Chubb likely not playing this week. Decent matchup here against the Commanders. His usage has been solid. I think he's definitely fair as a mid-tier RB2 play. Then I have Kareem Hunt, definitely a big riser. Heading into that game, I thought Carson Steele was going to be a nice option. We start off the game, Carson Steele's getting those starting snaps. Looks like the usage we had seen the previous week. Then he goes out, fumbles. I believe that was his second fumble since kind of stepping in for Isaiah Pacheco. So he just gets completely tossed aside. Kareem Hunt steps in, handles solid usage, doesn't make any huge mistakes, has 16 opportunities. At this point, I feel like we have to be assuming he's the running back 1 there. He's the most valuable guy in that backfield. Then I have Zach Moss and Chase Brown just straight up back-to-back. Zach Moss had looked like the clear running back 1 through the first 3 weeks. Week 4, both guys were productive, and they pretty much split the opportunities 50-50. It was a very, very close split here, and I still think both are very relevant because this is a good Bengals offense. This specific week, though, the Ravens have allowed the 3rd fewest points per game to the running back position, so I still think, they're definitely playable as back-end RB2s, but I think they're going to be better matchups moving forward where you feel confident maybe firing up both of them as mid-tier RB2 plays. This week, definitely more of back-end options. Now looking at tier 6, starting off with Devin Singletary here, and I'll just point out, he's dealing with a groin injury. If you have Singletary, if you don't have Singletary, but you're going to need someone to potentially slide in at running back, Tyrone Tracy is an interesting pickup. He would be the Devin Singletary handcuff, and I do think would be playable as an RB3 play if Devin Singletary were to miss. So Singletary, if he plays, this is kind of where he'd slot in. Obviously, if he's heading in with an injury, we have the extra concern that maybe he's somewhat limited. But after Singletary, going with Austin Eckler, and full transparency, I was not high on Austin Eckler heading into the season. I wasn't high on this Commanders offense as a whole. I think, they've overachieved pretty much all expectations here. But I was looking at Eckler, I'm like, a pass catching back, getting up there in age with a mobile quarterback. Typically those mobile QBs, they're not checking down because when they would check down or when a different quarterback would check down, they're taking off, they're scrambling, they're running. Austin Eckler has been very effective through 3 weeks, 11.8 PPR points per game. Then you look at the one game he misses, and McNichols steps up and scores 20.4 PPR points. So this Austin Eckler role, the RB2 spot behind Brian Robinson Jr., the guy's getting a little bit more passing work, it has been a very valuable role so far. So for Eckler, I feel like I have to bump him up here as a high-end RB3 play. Like I talked about earlier on, is a little bit of a tougher matchup. We'll see how they do, but through 4 weeks, it's tough to not like what we've seen, out of the Eckler / McNichols usage here. And then after Eckler, I have the Bucks backfield. So Bucky Irving, Rachaad White back-to-back. This really is turning into a 50-50 split. Both guys were fairly effective in week 4. Each guy got 4 goal line snaps. So I think at this point, we have to pretty much consider them identical at this point. I'd have more, belief in Bucky Irving long-term just because he's the guy who came in as the RB2. He is forcing this committee, and he has been the more productive guy through 4 weeks. But here in week 5, I think the usage is going to be pretty similar, just like what we saw in week 4. Then I have Javonte Williams going up against the Raiders. Saw, solid usage in week 4, 19 opportunities. This run game has just been so unbelievably bad, and there's been so little upside that it's tough to get excited. Pretty much any other backfield, if you're telling me a dude just got 19 opportunities and they're favored against the team that has the lowest implied points, they would be locked into the top 24, at worst an RB2. I just can't get there with Javonte Williams with how the season has started. And then the final guy in this tier, it's going to be Rico Dowdle. Looks like the Cowboys running back 1, 12 opportunities to Zeke 6 in week 4. But you have the fullback who's cutting into the receiving usage, the routes, which is not ideal because you'd like to have that receiving upside here with Rico Dowdle. So right now he is going to be trailing tier 6. Now looking at tier 7, kind of an interesting development here in the Patriots backfield. So we had Ramondre Stevenson, who has fumbled 4 times in the first 4 games. I believe he has lost 2 of those. And even though he fumbled week 4, he didn't get like the Bill Belichick punishment where he's going to, sit on the bench for the rest of the game. So it seemed like, all right, maybe he was in the clear. But then this week we are hearing from Gerard Mayo that like benching him is under consideration. And obviously if you have Ramondre, that is incredibly concerning here. Basically saying, you can't keep throwing a guy out there if he can't have ball security. So at this point, I feel like they're kind of 50-50. Like he didn't say we are benching Ramondre, we're going with Antonio Gibson. But if you weren't doing it or you weren't strongly considering it, you probably wouldn't just bring it up and throw it out there. So I'm favoring Antonio Gibson this week, but I do have Ramondre just right behind him. I guess my fear here is you go out, you bench him as the starter, Antonio Gibson's getting in there, and then it just turns into a 50-50 split. And this is not a 50-50 split on like the Bengals offense or the Bucks offense. It's a 50-50 split on the Patriots offense, which is pretty much unplayable. So if you're playing one of these dudes, you shouldn't be, banking on a 50-50 split. You should just be, making the bet that one of these guys is going to be the starter. So either you're betting that Ramondre is going to get benched and Gibson will be the guy, or you're betting that, they're not going to bench Ramondre and he will continue operating as the running back 1. Then also in this tier, we kind of just have like these interesting running back 2s. Braylon Allen, 34 opportunities in the last 3 weeks. Justice Hill has just had 2 very effective pass catching games. If you were going to look at a game script where maybe he could get involved as a pass catcher, this could be a decent spot here against the Bengals with a fairly close, odds here. And then the final tier, would prefer not to play these guys, but if you're desperate, you got to do what you got to do. Starting it off here with Tyler Algier, did out-carry Bijan Robinson week 4. I'd say that's probably a little bit fluky moving forward, but who knows? Then I have Emmanuel Wilson, who's kind of forcing a committee here with Josh Jacobs, definitely working his way into that backfield. Roshan Johnson had some decent usage in week 4, did get the goal line carry, but it does look like DeAndre Swift is the guy at this point. Then I have Zach Charbonnet, obviously filled in very well as a handcuff, now more of a running back 2, but could see some opportunities in a good matchup here. Then I have Tank Bigsby, talked about him with Travis Etienne, definitely working his way into this backfield. Alexander Madison has been the more valuable guy over Zamir White at this point. Definitely not a great matchup. The Raiders have the fewest implied points, but that could be a decent game script for Madison, who's more of like that pass catching back. And then the final guy here, Samaje Perine, going up against the Saints. Even though Kareem Hunt does look like the running back 1, Samaje Perine still worked on the goal line. He's been the guy in there on the 2-minute drill snaps. So I guess you're kind of just banking on him getting into the end zone. That's what you're hoping for, but obviously doesn't seem like a super fun play here as my running back 40. But that's going to wrap it up for my running back rankings this week. Any questions, drop them down below. Would love to hear your thoughts. I'll have the wide receivers out today also, as well as my rest of season rankings. So stay tuned for those. Thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.